Hey now, we are getting over, and I am the Silver King, Adam Silverstein, here to lead you through these hard times. With episode 589 of your favorite professional wrestling podcast. That's right, Getting Over is back once again, and it is Thursday, so you know exactly what that means. We are here to break down everything that happened over the last week in the worlds of NXT and AEW. NXT presented the second half of that NXT Spring Breakin' TV special, while AEW is fully on the way, building to Double or Nothing. We have an absolute ton to get to in this episode, as we always seem to here on the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. So allow me to remind you off the jump that this podcast
is all about Defy.
Please head on over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating on Apple. Take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we will read it live right here on the show. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Getting Overcast for episode drops, news, analysis, highlights, all of that good stuff. You can also send in questions and comments, tweets, and DMs for us on Twitter at Getting Overcast. And please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
And I hope you do as well, because for $5 a month or $50 for the entire year, you can become an official Getting Overhead. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up. You get bonus audio, instant reactions to Raw, NXT, Dynamite, and SmackDown nearly every single week. Sometimes Silver King's schedule does get in the way, but you do every single week get exclusive news posts on Fridays. And for those of you who have been following along, you know that we've been completely hitting on those of late. Again, buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Now, we do have a ton to get to today. We're talking NXT. We're talking AEW. At the end of the show, we're going to move back into one additional ratings discussion. We usually don't like to cover that here on the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. We're doing it for a couple reasons. One, there's some interesting stuff to discuss. Two, I did get a couple tweets and emails last week saying they enjoyed the fact that we covered ratings. I try to stay away from it because, number one, ratings don't actually matter that much. AEW is going to get a new TV deal. NXT already has a new TV deal. They're not going head to head. They never really have gone head to head ever since NXT moved off of Wednesday to Tuesday. So it just is tribal more than anything else. But in the emails and tweets that I did receive, a lot of people did stress they appreciated the even-handed, clear and objective way that we covered them last week. So what I'll go ahead and do is, when there are situations where the ratings are either abnormal or worth discussing because they were high, low, different, whatever the case might be, we will do our best to include those briefly in these conversations at the end of these episodes. But in general, we will stay away from them like we have for the entire existence of this podcast. With that said, we're going to kick things off with NXT, mostly because the Silver King had to cover 6 hours of AEW television and wrap it all together just due to the way their schedule shook out. That's going to be a much larger portion of today's show. We will save that for the second half. As always, there are timestamps in the episode description. So if you only want to listen to NXT or AEW, you can go ahead and do that. But I hope you listen to the entire show, start to finish, as always. So as mentioned, this was NXT Spring Breakin' Week 2. Trick Williams opened the show to a thunderous ovation and a Booker T, let's call it, remix on commentary. He looked fly as hell wearing a Versace-style robe and pants, and he started taking time out to put over Ilya Dragunov. He tagged this the Whoop That Era, saying we would all make history together. And I just want to pause briefly. Look, if WWE wants to promote that it's in a new era, because it largely is, with the ousting of Vince McMahon, Paul Levesque taking over creative, a lot of major production changes happening, that's fine. NXT and AEW this week, I probably heard new era a combined 10 times across the 6 hours of AEW and the 2 hours of NXT. Not everything needs to be in a new era. Not everything is in a new era. And I would not say that NXT nor AEW are in a new era. So just because WWE main roster says it Doesn't mean everyone else needs to. Just wanted to put that out there. I digress. Let's get back to this. Lash Legend came out after Trick said this. Talk about looking fly. She put Trick over, and he recalled that she tried to smack him last time they were in the ring together, but now that he has gold, clearly she wants a taste. They went back and forth with a ton of fun sexual innuendos that I'm not going to try to repeat, and the crowd was having a blast with tons of different chants. Easily the most sexually aggressive segment on any wrestling TV in a long-ass time. And a reminder, they are dating in real life. Lash teased that she had, quote, the truth in an envelope. She waved it in his face, saying he should enjoy his title win now because soon things are going to get really hot. He obviously had no idea what she was talking about. Ahead of the next segment, Trick exited as Obafemi entered and they stared down. And look, this just started super hot with Trick celebration. The back and forth with Lash was awesome as well. Obviously, the entire point was the cliffhanger, but trying to consider the options, I could really only come up with two. First is it's more details about Trick being attacked. If memory serves, I don't think we ever saw video of Carmelo Hayes doing it. I may be misremembering there. The other option, it's something akin to like the results of a prenatal paternity test. I mean, that could play because Lash hasn't wrestled on TV since February, though she has been working live events. It's probably something other than both of those, but again, those are the only two options that came to mind immediately off the jump. Gigi Dolan was learning about fine dining at dinner with Ariana Grace. Gigi burped after she drank water. They disagreed about more stuff, and she chugged the rest of the water and burped again. I don't burp when I chug water. I burp if I chug soda. I don't really drink soda. It requires carbonation for me to feel like that, but okay, fair enough. This basically served as like a ham-fisted preview of the spring breaking card for night 2, and NXT always does that ahead of special episodes. It was fine. It does feel like this story is kind of going nowhere between them, and I hope that changes, hopefully as soon as next week. Also, I didn't clip it for this show, but Gigi did drop big meaty men slapping meat during this promo, so we have another version of that will be on the show soon. The North American Championship was on the line. Obafemi against Ivar.
Oh, we got two big meaty men bumping me tonight.
I mean, just seeing those guys in the ring before the bell rang.
There's a lot of beef out here.
I mean, they were basically looking like two meat planets out there.
Where else can you see two beef planets like this colliding?
Beef planets, I like that.
Beef planets, my bad. Ivar hit a cannonball off the apron and then a twisting power slam inside. Then he crossbodied Femi through the barricade. And while it was probably gimmicked to break, it looked far more real than when it happens in the timekeepers area on the main roster. Ivar then tumbled off the ropes outside in another big spot. They sort of botched a springboard off the ropes. I mean, look, Ivar springing is difficult to start. Catching him is difficult as well. But Oba hit a nice discus lariat. Femi stopped the Doomsault and took Ivar off the top with a torture rack slam. Ivar then nailed the Doomsault, but Oba rolled closer to the ropes in the corner for a delayed cover break. Femi stopped a third Doomsault attempt, hit an electric chair, followed with his pop-up powerbomb finisher, and ultimately retained the title. Shortly after the bell, out of nowhere, Wes Lee's music hit. He walks through the crowd onto the barricade, then single hops from the barricade to the top of the steel steps, gets into the ring, stares down Oba. Now, we'll get to his return in a minute. Let's start with the match. This was exactly what it needed to be. Ivar was excellent working with Oba here, and you could almost like see Femi learning on the job between bells. There was even a part where Ivar, I think, called the match in the ring live, and Oba was able to keep up with him when he did that. The expected and ultimately right winner, obviously, was Femi. We got a fun false finish. It at least gave you pause for a second. I went 3.5 stars and a B for the match, 4 full slabs of beef for the action. The meat was there. We've seen more meat-focused matches, if that makes sense. So I did need to hold back that last slab.
Big meaty men slapping meat. That's what I want.
Wes Lee's return was an excellent surprise. When he first left with the back injury, there was legitimate, I wouldn't call it significant concern, but legitimate concern he could possibly not wrestle again. And that's usually the case when it's a back injury or a neck injury. And then we heard from WWE, I think they said it on television, that he could be out for a year. And similarly, that was a legitimately possible timetable, though the real number I had heard was 9 months. Instead, he was only gone 5 months, which is just awesome for him more than anyone else. If you remember, when he left, he was the number one contender for the North American title. So him coming back and immediately getting a match would have made perfect sense. I thought, okay, that's just what they're going to do. They're going to put the match together. They're going to recall him winning the number one contendership, and that's all we need. But that's not what they did. We'll get to that in a second. I could definitely see Wes Lee being the one to catch Femi and take the title because, look, Oba's already had it for 3 months. He's still a neophyte. He doesn't actually need the championship. He's already been made because of the championship. So for me, it would be best if he moves on and that title is contested in matches where it's more believable that different people can win it. Whereas most of his matches, you pretty much know he's going to retain, the exception being Stand and Deliver. Now it makes sense why Dijak didn't win the title because he got called up to the main roster. But in that match, we did think, oh, wow, Dijak could actually beat him there. So Josh Briggs later strode up to Ivar in the training room, giving him some grief about losing and repeating that he's the only one who can actually take down Oba, who is now softened up for him. Ivar said he's not done with Femi either when Wes Lee came in, giving both credit for testing Femi, but saying it was his time to go after him. Briggs gave him shit about the concept of cutting the line, so Wes challenged him for a number one contendership, with Ivar again repeating that he's not done with it. And it's fine that he's going to have a match, Wes, and earn his way. They absolutely could have just given him the match, as I explained, but I'm never going to complain about someone earning it in the ring. So Ava opened hour 2, announcing a huge opportunity at NXT Battleground, which is when the Women's North American Champion will be crowned. And it's going to be done just like the initial men's title holder in a ladder match. There will be a combine beginning next week with 6 qualifying matches determining the match participants for the ladder match. I know I just said match like 10 times there. Jada Parker came out right away, claiming she's the next headline maker and will be the first champion. Sol Ruca followed suit, as did Ariana Grace. She hysterically questioned the violence aspect of the entire thing. Next out was Mi Chin, making a surprise return to NXT, saying she has unfinished business and would enter the combine. Grace tried talking, so Mi Chin slugged her, and the women's locker room cleared with everyone brawling. What was hysterical here is that while all the women were fighting, Ariana stood in the middle of the ring with like her arms out, screaming for everyone to stop. I just thought that was pretty fun. Lash was involved here in the fracas, so that probably negates the whole pregnancy angle concept. The only part that bothered me was having 4 women come out, basically, I don't want to say negating the entire concept of the combine, but at least rendering it not as important, because we pretty much now know at least 2/3 of the competitors in this match. I mean, maybe Ariana doesn't get in, and I would actually keep her out of it. I don't think she's the right person to be in this type of match. But the other 3, Michin, Ruka, and Parker, they're definitely qualifying for this. I actually wouldn't mind Michin winning the title, just given Keith Lee has a North American Championship, and that would be a cool parallel. Plus, she's still badly in need of TV time, befitting her talent. She is really good in the ring. She's pretty damn good on the mic, and she just doesn't really get opportunities on the main roster. You make her the first women's North American champion, have her carry that title for 3 months, all of a sudden that thing actually means something. I do wonder who ultimately is going to be chosen for the other spots and how the combine concept will factor into the qualifying matches. For me, no-brainers to fill out the other spots. Lash, Fallon Henley, and Julia. That's if she debuts here and if they want to put her in a title match right away. I could see them putting Julia here, having her win the title, and it being a big deal right off the jump. So maybe that's exactly what they do. Overall, I did see like some report out there about how this was initially meant to be a full tournament and they changed it because of Queen of the Ring. Not true. This was the plan. If they didn't want to do tournament aspect, they wouldn't do qualifying matches. All simple as that. Now let's move to the main event of the show, Natalya against Lola Vice in NXT Underground. We saw the faces and heels preparing separately before the match. Natty listened to advice from Carmen Petrovic, while Lola dismissed advice from Shayna Baszler, who told her she needed to work on her ground game. Vice said that her hands were so fast, it would make that unnecessary. Again, this main event of the show, that was appropriate. One slightly interesting visual aspect of this, at least to me, is we've seen the men do these matches, right? And generally they wear dark clothes, jeans, whatever their normal gear is. Women, generally in professional wrestling, especially in WWE, they wear brighter and shinier gear. And that was the case with Natty and Lola. So that gave the entire underground scene like a different look. It was almost like meant to be grimy and gritty, but then they come in all shining and bright. And that juxtaposition of the two looks kind of popped on screen. It was interesting. Lola looked like a badass, by the way. Her hair was braided, so much more serious than usual, and a way better look. I understand why she doesn't braid her hair usually, and she certainly looks good with the long and flowing hair, whatever the case might be. But this made her appear so much more serious as a fighter, especially given her MMA, I don't call them accolades because she hasn't actually done much, but her MMA background, let's say. Natty immediately speared Lola out of the ring right into a bunch of people. Lots of groundwork with submission counters, short-range strikes. Natty hit 2 snap suplexes ringside. She got her legs whipped out under the announce table. And then she got rolled spine first into the ring post. More exchange strikes on the ground before Lola got most of a guillotine. Natty slammed her into the canvas, so Lola released and locked it back in, only for Natty to bring her outside for a slam ringside. Natty went knee into the post and tried to do a figure 4 like Bret Hart. She didn't get the other leg on it, so it was kind of just like a knee bar, which isn't really as effective. The seconds started fighting outside. They banged into the post with Vice's knee hitting it. Natty took advantage by trying a sharpshooter, but just as she was about to lock it in, Baszler interfered. Natty tossed her into the PC students ringside and actually locked in the sharpshooter. Vice screamed. She started grabbing people to try to help her, but Natty dragged her back into the middle of the ring, only for Shayna to put the Kirifuda clutch on Petrovic ringside right in front of Natty. So she eventually released the hold to save Carmen. She threw Shayna into the barricade. Of course, Lola caught her blind with a back fist and started slamming her on the canvas, with the referee calling a stoppage via knockout. This booking worked because Lola going over in NXT and benefiting from beating Natty was the necessary and really most beneficial result. But man, I think anyone watching this, they really wanted to see Natty get that submission win with the sharpshooter. And that was a lot of interference from Shayna, seemingly for no reason. I know they've had issues in the tag team division, but not great enough, at least not in my opinion, where it would factor this much into a match like this. And if I recall, for both of the men's matches, I don't think there was any interference, or if there was, it did not majorly factor into the decision. And for a match that was so good and running so hot, that was disappointing that it just didn't end clean. There really was no reason for it not to end clean. Still, this was an absolute blast. NXT Underground, it's 3 for 3. It can do no wrong at this point. These women proved they're just as capable as the men at putting on a banger in this environment. I enjoy how NXT uses it sparingly, because if you just overdid it, you would get tired of it. But I hope they continue to switch it between both genders, because I definitely want to see more women in this match type. I went 4 stars A-. I thought it was an excellent main event. I would love to see this rematched, Natty and Lola, in the fight pit at NXT Battleground, given it's going to be at that shitty UFC Apex anyway. That would make it the 3rd women's match on the card, most likely. You assume Roxanne Perez will defend the title. We know the Women's North American Championship is going to be defended in the ladder match. But man, I would love to see this in the fight pit. Natty gets her win back, no interference, and I think it would just fit the story that they're telling. Speaking of the Women's Championship, Roxanne Perez ranted at Ava backstage, saying it's her fault that she wasn't chosen in the WWE draft. Ava explained that champions were protected, but Roxy was unhinged and not listening to her. Ava said that she's going to talk to her about something for next week, but she couldn't get the words out before Perez dissed her and walked off, with Ava telling someone in her office they'd circle back to it later. I continue to enjoy Roxy's heel character. She's doing a great job in this role. Now, after the Underground match was over, the last segment of the entire show, Ava told Roxy she would be defending her title next week against Chelsea Green. She showed up behind her, taunting. She was wearing a funny outfit, whole deal. Perez was pissed, given she just defended the title, and there was a great moment between Chelsea and Ava where Chelsea praised her for clearly being better than Adam Pearce and Nick Aldis because she actually believed in her and gave her an opportunity. It was literally the last thing I expected seeing Chelsea here. I figured Roxy would fight the Underground winner for a title, but what a pleasant surprise. It would be really cool to see Chelsea actually get to wrestle for a change and put on a full match. I do need, though, an interaction at some point between her and Ariana. It just fits too well together. Now, in terms of Chelsea immediately getting a title match, I don't love that. You guys know my perspective. Would have preferred it to be non-title if it's a one-off, or for Chelsea to win a match before getting a title opportunity. Though there is something to be said, and it's different for NXT than anywhere else, main roster talent coming down, they're at a higher level within the organization. So being at a higher level, and for lack of a better term, slumming it, it's not really the worst idea for them to get a title match, those types of people. But there was also a social media video of Robert Stone and Chelsea kind of reuniting, agreeing they need to catch up. And I truly, truly hope that not only transpires next week, but makes its way to the main roster. They were incredible together. And pairing them with Piper Niven, doing a Robert Stone brand heel trio on SmackDown, maybe, I'm just putting it out there, throw Tiffany Stratton into the mix, make him a full Robert Stone brand faction. Eventually, when Tiffany turns babyface, she can turn against them, and she'll clearly get cheered when that happens. I love that idea, and I really hope they follow through with it. The tag team championships are on the line. Nathan Frazier and Axiom defending against Authors of Pain. The Street Profits randomly showed up, giving the champions some confidence, saying they have the heart, AOP does not, and that they should never slow down. Paul Ellering, backstage with Final Testament, said the faction is coming for every title. AOP threw Axiom into Frazier as he was attempting a tope suicida. Axiom went for a Spanish fly somehow. Scarlett saved. That led the referee to eject her and Karrion Kross. New Catch Republic ended up jumping in out of the crowd. They caught AOP with a double kick. That allowed the champions to get a roll-up, 1, 2, 3, and retain the titles. The match was actually kind of lackluster, which was not at all what I expected. I keep saying this. I love AOP in NXT. This just wasn't really hitting for me. But I loved the finish because it played into both what happened on SmackDown and what we discussed on the WWE podcast this Tuesday. New Catch Republic got drafted to Raw, so I thought they got the shit kicked out of them last Friday, but would have no recourse for revenge, no chance to get over on AOP. Instead of that being the case, they got revenge here, which means they ran a story across both shows. And as I've also said many times on the podcast, that needs to happen more. Now, this could have just as easily been the Profits helping out. They have history with AOP as well, but ultimately, this worked well. Thea Hale fought JC Jane. Hale was going nuts, getting pumped up backstage with Chase U. She assumed Fallon Henley would accompany her ringside, but she first declined given what happened with Jada Parker last week, and also the fact that she was just depressed from not being drafted. But Thea ultimately convinced her, and Fallon had to give in because she's so spunky and happy and fun. Jane countered Hale's springboard senton with a great midair neckbreaker. Thea hit a Michinoku driver, but JC countered her with a great pinning combination. Fallon saved Thea from an attempted Pele kick by Jasmine Nix ringside, and Hale capitalized by catching Jane in the Kimura lock for the expected, but still in kayfabe, upset victory. Chase U went wild celebrating. Henley kept selling the kick ringside. Andre Chase bumped into Fallon when she entered the ring trying to celebrate with them, so she grabbed Thea's arm as she was exiting the ring, punched her straight in the face. Then she looked down at JC, but Jane was just happy to see like another heel exist because she's a piece of shit and gimmick, and I guess she likes bad people. By the way, JC's nose was completely busted open, just pouring blood down the stretch of this match. You have to imagine she broke her nose here. This was basically perfect to wrap up that storyline because we all knew Thea eventually needed to win. It was awesome to see how far she's come in less than 2 years, and really both of them. They are showcasing more and more skill every single time they get in the ring, which I'll repeat is the entire point of NXT. Jane, she's ready for the main roster. She has been ready for the main roster. Since she didn't get the call up, I would really like to see her with a run holding the women's championship. I don't think she'll be the one to beat Roxanne Perez, but maybe she'll beat the person who beats Roxy. That would make a lot of sense. As far as Fallon's turn, I'm against it from the standpoint of it just felt unnecessary and somewhat ill-fitting for her character. That said, even though I find it unnecessary, they have been building to this for multiple weeks. She's been growing increasingly frustrated, both in wins and losses, the way people are treating her and reacting to her. So it made sense for her character in kayfabe. But the other reason why this works, even though I'm against it, is again, NXT is about development. This is not a role she's played previously. So since they decided not to call her up, giving her a chance to do something different certainly makes sense. Like with JC, though, I really thought Fallon should be in the main event card of this division as a women's champion last year. So hopefully they're both in that spot at some point this year. And that would work best for her as a babyface, but we will see how this goes. Ridge Holland fought Sean Spears. Holland basically ran through Spears across a commercial break, hitting a Death Valley driver in the corner and that cradle DDT finisher for the win. Sounds like it's being called the Redeemer. It was a boring ass match. And while it does feel like Holland is maybe developing a character, it kind of remains nonsensical, the whole brief retirement deal. This was by far the lowest point of the entire show. Hale backstage was upset at what transpired. She was crying to Chase U. When Holland came in checking on her, Andre Chase took him aside to make sure he's doing okay, and he said he was taking it one day at a time, doing things the right way. Nothing much to discuss here, but a nice bit of world building and storyline combining, legitimately better than anything Ridge has done since his return. Then we saw Metaphor in the NXT parking lot saying they would reveal all next week about Trick Williams before Kalani Jordan tracked down Henley, saying the attack on Hale wasn't like her. Fallon said she was putting herself first going forward. NXT always does a really nice job tying stories together and providing cliffhangers for the next week in these parking lot segments. This, of course, was another example of that. Tyson DuPont and Tyreek Igwe fought the Good Brothers. There was another interview-style promo with the Neophytes covering their long-term relationship and some other personal details, like what they studied and being legitimate dorks or whatever the case. DuPont got the hot tag and hit a really nice running uppercut plus a kip-up. Luke Gallows took a two-man spinebuster, but Igwe ate the ring post and a perfect Carl Anderson spinebuster before the Good Brothers hit Magic Killer for the win. Decent showing from the rookies. I didn't see much special from them. They didn't really pop on screen, but look, it was their first match. Obviously, the right winner is having the veterans go over the first-timers. Malik Blade checked on Idris Enofe, making sure he was okay after the mirror broke last week. Brindley Reese popped in with kittens, trying to help change his luck, but instead of kittens, they were black cats. Cute, but whatever. Also, dogs are better. Sorry, folks, it's true. Cats are fine. Dogs are better. So for the first time ever, there was a Nightbird QR code on NXT. The URL read Kintsugi, which is the Japanese art of repair, and I think specifically repairing broken pottery. That led to a video and a hidden word on the page that read Lagrange point, which is a point in space where an object stays put because the gravitational pull of two other forces keep it in a steady position. This video included the words from the Statue of Liberty, which you'll remember was gifted to us from France. Also included were "Remember Who You Are" on the paper, the GPS voice saying he's waiting for you, and then this: "They were broken, I didn't fix them, I accepted them, and then they opened the door," repeating multiple times before the last line said, "We can be family." Nothing extra in the page source this time, but this basically included the same teases that we've been talking about. Clearly, this is not the return of one person, as we've been talking about on the show, but the debut of a family or a group or a faction, perhaps the Wyatt 5, 6, whatever it ends up being called. There are, by the way, 5 Lagrange points, I believe, and the Statue of Liberty reference makes me feel like this is going to happen in France at Backlash, which again is something we've discussed multiple times as being likely on the show. So that wraps up NXT this week. It was a very entertaining episode. I think they kind of crushed Spring Breakin' across both weeks, NXT did. And you will remember, this is coming off of a string of what I consider to be pretty disappointing, not that entertaining shows. Feels like NXT is right back on track. Good timing, obviously, because they're about a month away from NXT Battleground. They're building to that show. And just obviously with the NBA playoffs ongoing and the NHL playoffs as well, they got to be putting on good TV to maintain their ratings. Now, they did slip in the ratings this week. We'll discuss that at the end of the show, as I mentioned. But nevertheless, in terms of 2 hours of professional wrestling television, the Silver King was plenty entertained. So with that said, let's move over to AEW. As I mentioned at the start of the show, we're going in with 6 hours of AEW this week. That includes a bonus Rampage from Wednesday after Dynamite. And folks, I watched all 6 of those hours on Wednesday. Let's just say that's a lot of anything in one sitting, particularly AEW shoved together during the NBA playoffs. General takeaways from this week, mostly positive, actually. Dynamite and one Rampage match on Wednesday was far better and more exciting than the crowd would have had you believe in Winnipeg. They basically got loud for one segment and half of a match, and that was it. Dynamite was probably the best individual AEW show in weeks, but it did have a few flaws, namely that a couple matches, both of them featuring older, slower talent, went on way, way too long. But like I said, easily AEW's best overall show of the week. Everything else between Collision and the 2 Rampages, somewhat of a mixed bag. The other good news, I need a name for this weekly breakdown. Maybe we can call it the Storyline Index, the SI, something like that. But it was so much better than usual. Across 6 hours, AEW had 18 matches and a flat 50% had legitimate or acceptable storyline build, or at least reasons for happening. My guess is that might have been a consequence of the 3-hour blocks and planning ahead due to Tony Khan being busy legitimately with the NFL draft. It's going to be interesting to see if this continues or keeps improving. Again, the goal, 66 to 70%. This is a lot closer than it's been recently. We've been in the 30s, the 20s a couple of weeks, the 40s sometimes. 50% is solid. There was a lot more green on my document than usual, and it made the shows, particularly Wednesday, more interesting. By the way, guess what? The thing everyone is talking about coming out of Dynamite is, it's not a match, it's a storyline. And no, you don't have to only do storylines. You don't have to only do matches. It's about the right mix, and Dynamite this week gave us that mix, which it so frequently does not. So let's start with Dynamite. It opened with Tony Khan via satellite in front of a Jacksonville Jaguars logo, saying he would be producing the show remotely because he's not clear to travel given what transpired with the Elite last week. The feed was cut into by the Young Bucks in the production truck, saying they have ironclad contracts with a founder's clause, which is why they have not been fired. So they ran into a new intro. It was all clips of the Elite. And I guess, look, a billionaire's only avenue of control is a satellite feed. Without it, he's rendered useless. He doesn't have a computer, a cell phone, any other way to control the show. It was that one little setup he had, and since they cut his satellite feed, that was it. Forget all the other technology available, the ability of lawyers to maintain control in his stead, the ability to send a representative on his behalf. I'm just being candid. The way this came off, this is probably going to be my harshest criticism of the entire show, because I very much did like Dynamite. This came off like a couple kids playing NWO. Later backstage, the Bucks gave their interview time to Jack Perry, who said all he wants is what's best for AEW. That was his goal in taking out Tony. Fans started chanting CM Punk. Jack said he was willing to be the scapegoat to help AEW move forward, and now it's Khan's turn to sacrifice so AEW can enter a new era under the Elite. I told you, they said it like a dozen times. This was actually more interesting than any individual part of this storyline to date. Sensible reasoning by Perry, even if it's kind of tough to buy him in this role. Kenny Omega came out for the main event segment on Dynamite, and all Tony Schiavone could muster is that he's never seen him have a bad match. I'm not sure what relevance that had at this juncture or why he felt it needed to be said here, but I'm also like at my wit's end with Tony these days, so maybe I'm just annoyed by him. It was just so odd to say that. Omega looked great. He got the loudest reaction of the entire night. The only criticism for Omega, the way he looked, his suit pants were way too long. You got to get those hemmed, buddy. Omega announced his diverticulitis diagnosis, saying he was at one point 24 hours away from dying. He said he stopped watching wrestling because he was scared, thinking he would have to retire, but he turned on Dynasty and realized he was actually just suffering from withdrawal for not being in the ring. Omega then promised he's not done with wrestling until he exhausts every single medical option. Then he turned his attention to the Bucks, saying they can fire him from the Elite, but he's still an EVP with the same power as them. Kazuchika Okada came out to a surprisingly light, reduced pop. They even went face-to-face. That did get some holy shit chants, but they were not loud whatsoever. Omega told Okada to give him a few months and they would renew their rivalry in AEW. Okada said he's sorry and he's the best bout machine now. Jack then blindsided Kenny, knocked him over from behind, hit a few security guards with chairs, and did a handful of moves on Jack while grabbing his stomach. Okada just disappeared out of the ring while all of this was happening. Eventually, he did trip Kenny when he tried a V-trigger. That led Jack to hit Omega in the gut with a chair. The Bucks came out and did the EVP trigger on Omega, and that basically ended the segment. But FTR made a save well after a guy with diverticulitis got the shit kicked out of him. Omega was wheeled into an ambulance as Rampage started, with the Elite destroying FTR backstage given their 4-on-2 advantage. The Bucks then told Omega it was only business. They dumped him off the stretcher for another hard bump. This was easily, I want to be very clear about this, easily Kenny Omega's best promo across 5 years of AEW. And he didn't cut, obviously, as many promos in New Japan. What he would do backstage was almost always good. In the ring, it was either very babyface or very heel, just playing into storyline. But they absolutely killed this. Pitch perfect in tone, executed well from a storytelling perspective, came across like a main character, which has not been the case for quite some time. On its own, it was the best part of Dynamite, probably the best part of AEW TV this week. As far as the attack, it was paced out and executed well. one presumes Omega was cleared to do this action because the belief is that he legitimately needs more time, unless he's been working. I mean, he's been talking about it on like his Twitch channel, saying he needs an operation or he needs some type of work done. And he said it multiple times, very candidly. So this was one of those situations where it was uncomfortable to watch, not because of the actions of the heels, but because we know the reality of his ailment. Omega's selling was excellent throughout, though. I'd say this all gained him more sympathy than it gave heat to the Elite, but we'll have to see next week. And it also clearly set up Omega Okada 5 for All In, which is simply a massive match on a major show. So I would definitely call this successful. After a rough start to this nonsensical Tony Buck stuff with the All In footage and all that bullshit, the last two segments we got from this, Perry's promo backstage, Omega's promo in the ring, and the attack, those definitely hit on Wednesday. On Collision, Swerve Strickland opened the show giving his first comments since winning the AEW championship, this coming directly off an NBA playoff lead-in. He recapped the last week in AEW, saying the Elite attacking Tony Khan was a bitch move before putting over his title win. Swerve spoke to his daughter through the camera, saying he can't make up for lost time, but he'll make sure the sacrifice was worthwhile. Then he issued a challenge that Claudio Castagnoli answered, and it just kind of petered out from there. This ended up getting the biggest quarter hour of the week for AEW ratings-wise, just given the NBA lead-in. So as I said last week, it ultimately made sense that they delayed Swerve's first comments as champion until this segment. I still think he could have said something last Wednesday. What bothered me here is that it didn't feel big for two primary reasons. One, it was at Daly's place. Two, Swerve was kind of sloppy in his promo, which is unlike him usually. He may not generally be the smoothest promo out there, but this was on the rougher side. I'm not sure if really he or AEW put their best foot forward doing this segment in this moment. I don't exactly know what they could have done instead, but I'm also kind of talking off the cuff here, not sitting down with a pen and paper and trying to book it out. But I would have done something far more exciting to capture the audience versus just having a guy go to the ring and talk. It's pretty much what I'm trying to say. Later on Collision, the AEW title was on the line, Swerve defending against Claudio. Of course, this was the main event. They did a sequence around the elevated stage before Swerve hit a 450 inside. Claudio did a running Swerve stomp, only for Strickland to sit up, hit a vertical suplex and a full Swerve stomp for a false finish. Claudio avoided house call, coming back with a swing and sharpshooter. For some reason, Swerve tried the stomp while Claudio was standing, so Castagnoli caught him for a European uppercut. Swerve eventually hit the stomp somewhat pop-up style, adding house call to retain the title in 21 minutes. They shook hands after the bell as well. Commentary told us a half dozen times the match was great and that AEW has the best wrestlers. The work was excellent, 4 stars A-. I'd have preferred about 5 minutes less in the match. It almost became indulgent down the stretch, and this is going to be a trend we're going to talk about this week. But it was a worthy main event after being teased at the top of the show. I do wish they actually promoted it more throughout the 2-hour program, reminding people it was coming up. They didn't do that, and it's another mistake AEW continuously makes. Swerve opened Dynamite on Wednesday with it previously advertised. This is key. Previously advertised that he would learn his challenger for Double or Nothing on the show. He was back in the weird eye makeup here after not wearing it on Collision. Swerve looked much better on Saturday. He called the Elite's actions a bitch move for a second time. The Bucks interrupted on the big screen, angry at his words, saying he needed to be humbled. Then they introduced his challenger, which was Christian Cage. Commentary told us he was deserving of a world title match, but they didn't say why. Cage acted like he was going to talk, but instead he cheap-shotted Swerve with the mic. He fought back, leading to a 3-on-1 beatdown, ending with kill switch into the AEW title. Nick Wayne then hit Wayne's World on Prince Nana. Christian said he didn't forget what Swerve did, attacking Nick in his gym, nor losing as his tag team partner at All In. Then, of course, he said he'll take Swerve's place as his daughter's father. Luchasaurus then randomly ripped out one of Swerve's braids, and I think that was supposed to be like some big impactful moment, but it was met with total crickets from the crowd. This was interesting because the fans were silent as it transpired, extremely lacking reaction in general, but especially given it was in Canada and Christian's a Canadian. The only heat Christian got was with a hockey reference. No one came to help Swerve, which on one hand was appropriate because he's not a real babyface, but also, what happened to the Mogul Embassy? They just don't exist anymore. Now, look, Christian makes plenty of sense as a challenger, given all the reasoning he laid out. Zero argument from me there. Am I excited about it? Not really, but it's legit given what he said. My problem is that this guy quit in his last match. He's been off TV for 5 weeks, and he wasn't even anywhere near the top of AEW's rankings, which that's okay if you're talking about a mid-card title. It's not really okay if you're talking about the world title. Now, AEW was in a tough spot because they didn't want to rush Will Ospreay in this match. He's number 1 in those rankings, and for some reason, he's going after a lower level title than the world title. But what's the point of the rankings if they don't matter at all? Now, remember, this was advertised before the Bucks took over the show. So Tony Khan, in theory, told Swerve he was going to learn his next opponent on Dynamite, which means one of two things. Either Christian was that opponent no matter what, and the Bucks coming on screen to announce him didn't matter, or someone else was that opponent. They got jettisoned from that role. Christian took their place, and that person should be really angry, and we should also have found out Wednesday who that was. But since the Bucks did take over the show, wouldn't it have made more sense for them to give the title match to Jack Perry, who just joined them, who's the scapegoat, or maybe give it to Hangman Page since they're all heels and friends, plus Hangman was in a blood feud with the guy who's the new champion? So again, I don't hate Christian as the challenger, given the explanation, but this segment had zero heat, and this kind of came out of nowhere. You could literally hear a pin drop during long stretches of this segment. And now that I'm talking this through and I mentioned Hangman, I think I'm forgetting the fact that he was either suspended from the Elite or suspended from AEW as part of that angle a few weeks ago. So it does make sense, I guess, that they didn't choose Hangman for this spot, but it doesn't make sense that they didn't choose Jack Perry, who's just right there for the taking as a number 1 contender. That needs to be explained. On Rampage this week, Swerve said he would have a talk with Christian on Dynamite next week and that he wouldn't be alone. Hopefully that's Mogul Embassy just to make sense of it. On Dynamite, Claudio fought Brian Cage in a taped promo that aired during entrances. Claudio said he's the best, not because he wins the most, but because he's the most consistent. Yeah, that is not the definition of best by any stretch of the imagination. You can be consistently good, consistently bad, consistently mediocre. Just because you wrestle well doesn't make you the best. I digress. Claudio did the swing and sharpshooter combo and won via submission. This was a total waste of time. I truly believe AEW could have gotten rid of this match, trimmed 2 other matches on the show, and put together a far more interesting storytelling type of segment that actually built something fresh. On Collision, House of Black did their typical spooky promo with Brody King pointing out he has 2 wins over the TNT champion. They accepted the Cope Open, saying Adam Copeland would find out his challenger along with the rest of the world. Now, my thought here was, based on the fact that King has 2 pinfall victories over Copeland, it would certainly make the most sense for him to challenge. That way they could push the Malachi Black match off to a pay-per-view or a special show. But the fact that it wasn't him told me immediately off the jump it was going to be Buddy Matthews, and he was most likely going to go through all 3 guys. And on Dynamite, the TNT title was on the line. Copeland against, yes, Buddy Matthews. There was some voiceover from Black that didn't really serve a purpose. It sounded okay. Buddy came out. He got 0 reaction outside of my couch. I was excited to see this. Doesn't seem like anyone else really was. It was clear, given Matthews was out, of course, that Copeland would wind up fighting all 3 guys in order. And commentary told us Buddy was 7-0-1 in his last 8 matches, which was false. He's 4-3 in his last 7. And the only reason I looked it up is because I like Buddy, and I figured I would realize if he had won 7 of his last 8 matches. They both battled on the top rope and fell off simultaneously, taking apron bumps for 9 counts. Next, they collided midair in a planned crossbody, and Buddy started spitting or coughing up blood, so they went immediately to a commercial break, picture in picture, and the match continued. We'll get back to that. Buddy hit a Liger bomb. Cope avoided a sunset flip powerbomb. They did a great impaler DDT false finish. The match was kind of dead until this sequence. It gave it a ton of juice. Matthews added a jackhammer, crossface, and go to sleep after avoiding a spear. Cope then avoided a stomp and came back with the spear for the win. Now, Cope, the babyface, attacked Buddy after the bell, hitting him with a chair. Commentary told us it was the mist that made Copeland crazy as he set up a concerto. The lights went out. Black arrived, telling Cope, just go ahead, hit him with the chair. Buddy sat up. Cope turned to Malachi with the chair, and suddenly the lights went out and they were both gone. Okay, let me start with what I loved, which was the match. Now, it was definitely 7 to 8 minutes too long, which is why it started so slow and ponderous for a long stretch as they were kind of wasting time to get to the exciting part. I mean, there was like a 2-minute headlock during this match, unnecessary. But once they hit third gear, it was exactly what I wanted from both of them. Buddy looked fantastic as usual. He remains one of the most underrated wrestlers in the business. I also like that Copeland got a clean win, though, of course, AEW is not really about protecting Buddy, unfortunately. In terms of Matthews spitting up blood, I assume this was like a bitten tongue or something orally related, because even with AEW, I cannot imagine they would let him continue the match with some type of internal injury, which is the first thing you generally think about when you see two men collide crossbody style with their chests and then someone come out of that spitting up blood. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here, even if historically AEW may not deserve it. I will flip out if I hear this guy had an internal injury and they allowed that match to continue. The post-match was super interesting as well. Commentary kind of ruined it for me. Cope doesn't need Black Mist as a reason to do a concerto. He's done it 100 times in his career, both as a heel and as a babyface. If the mist actually affected him, wouldn't it have done something to his face like it occasionally does when they decide that the mist affects one person and then doesn't affect the other person? I don't know. The whole thing's kind of convoluted with the mist. He shouldn't need it to use a concerto or go crazy. Copeland has been manic both as a babyface and a heel before. It just seems convoluted. On Rampage last week, Kyle O'Reilly cut a backstage promo about returning to his hometown to wrestle. It was the 4th or 5th time in the 3-hour TNT block Saturday that someone said, "Where the best wrestle." There was literally no other purpose to the promo than saying that. On Dynamite, Rocky Romero backstage said he wouldn't get involved in the Orange Cassidy-Trent Beretta beef, so he challenged O'Reilly given their interaction a couple weeks ago where Kyle wanted a friendly fight. Fine. Later backstage, Copeland was asked why he seems all out of sorts, further playing into the miss shit. When KOR walked up with eyes on the TNT title, Copeland told him that he had King next and O'Reilly had Romero, and they could maybe commiserate after that. It's fine, and obviously this was clear. Copeland's going to go through all 3 House of Black guys. On Rampage this week, O'Reilly fought Romero. Rocky did a nice avalanche sliced bread with 1 foot off the ring post. Bunch of counters and reversals. O'Reilly eventually got the pinfall. Good mat wrestling. Nothing that exciting. On Collision, Toni Storm beat Anna Jay in a non-title match. Anna hit a flatliner and locked in Queenslayer. Storm simply broke it. She hit hip attack in Storm Zero and kind of got like a sudden victory. Before this match, Serena Deeb backstage called Toni one of AEW's greatest champions while claiming to be the obvious #1 contender. She kept mixing third person and first person when speaking about herself, which was odd, but simultaneously for Serena Deeb, not exactly out of place.
Yeah, all your sports teams, they're all failures.
On Dynamite, Deeb fought Mariah May. Serena did a neckbreaker across the middle rope before hitting a spinning one inside off a bunch of counters. Mariah took a German suplex and an arm trap lariat, but came back with an excellent missile dropkick, hip attack, and pump knee. Deeb dizzied May into a backslide, but took a big suplex before catching May on the ropes with a single leg crab. Serena smashed her knee into the canvas multiple times. That led Storm to throw in the towel to end the match because, as I will repeat once again, AEW protects far too many people on this roster from simple pinfalls and submissions. Now, it was unique for AEW to do this, like as a particular finish, but it was immensely repetitive not to have someone take an actual fall. 2 seconds after the bell, the match graphic for Double or Nothing was on the big screen. Storm, Deeb. The wrestling here was high quality, a bit slow and clunky, but the moves and the overall work was solid. The crowd only bought into the individual parts of it, but again, it was better than the crowd response it received. On Rampage last week, Thunder Rosa beat Deonna Purrazzo in 11 minutes. Thunder had really strange yellow gear that was unlike anything she normally wears. Deonna caught her flying with an armbar. Rosa countered back into a rear naked choke. They eventually did a pinfall counter sequence, leading to Rosa countering an armbar attempt into the pinfall victory. She briefly talked shit into the camera, which led to Purrazzo attacking her on the stage until they were separated by security. Deonna gave her 4 flipped birds and 4 chin flicks, basically 8 fuck yous all at once. There was good heat here, and the match was quality. Purrazzo is much better as a heel, so I did appreciate the character flip. Thunder also needed a substantial win. She's still kind of fresh in her return. This was the best part of Rampage last week by a mile. On Rampage this week, Deonna said last week's attack has her feeling like herself again. On Rampage this week, Saraya and Harley Cameron talked shit about Mariah backstage, seemingly for no reason whatsoever. They called her Tiny Storm, which was very funny, especially because a lot of people mock Tony Khan and they call him Tiny Khan. So the fact that they call her Tiny Storm worked in a number of different ways. Harley then challenged her to a match on Dynamite. Then Saraya remarked about both of them already having their tits out because they were wearing cleavage shirts. And like, true.
They look good, but she's got me saying, hey now!
But also like kind of enough with the whole tits out gimmick. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. This is going to be Harley's first match on AEW TV, her third match this year anywhere, and the 22nd match of her entire career. And she's been wrestling for 2.5 years. I have no idea what this is going to look like on Wednesday. I just wanted to give everyone that heads up. On Rampage last week, Chuck Taylor fought Trent Beretta in a parking lot fight. Orange Cassidy on Collision said he had a lot to think about, but was afraid what they would do to one another. Chris Statlander then came up to bring him backstage. Chuck later told Orange not to interfere. Chuck bladed and fell backwards into, I shit you not, a random piece of drywall that was on top of a pickup truck bed. Trent did an elbow drop off one car onto another. He eventually bladed himself way too deep. He was gushing blood from his head and I think his hand as well. Chuck was later tossed into another piece of drywall that had light bulbs on it for some reason. Trent took a razor's edge into a car windshield, real glass. That was definitely the spot of the match. Trent low-blowed Chuck atop a car, then pile drove him into the roof before locking him in a triangle choke for a referee stoppage. He picked up a wrench. That led Orange and Stat to stop him, so he smashed it into a window, and Chuck sold it as if he took the wrench into his ankle. This did not hold a candle to the prior parking lot match. It was messy, convoluted, overly bloody, nowhere near as entertaining. I found myself just wanting it to end, which is not the mindset you should have watching a match like this. I just found it boring and predictable, and now we go to Orange Trent, clearly next week. On Dynamite, Orange hit the ring saying he hoped best friends would reunite, getting their demons out in that fight. He said that won't happen because Trent's post-match attack on Chuck was so violent that Taylor will never wrestle again. Trent interrupted again, calling him selfish, blaming him for ending Chuck's career, and this had Orange enraged. He got held back by 4 security guards, and then suddenly, Don Callis comes out, whispers something in his ear, and walks him to the back. Trent gave a thumbs up, and that was the end of the segment. Now, Orange not being allowed to attack Trent was totally idiotic. For what reason can two wrestlers not brawl?
We're wrestlers in a wrestling ring. Let's just freaking wrestle.
That said, the Callis shit is super, super interesting. That has my attention. Does he recruit Orange? Maybe he replaces Will Ospreay. Does Orange consider going with them and then ultimately turn on them and feud with the entire Callis family? I am extremely curious to see where this goes. Other than the Omega and Elite stuff, this one moment was by far the most interesting thing on AEW TV over the 6 hours I watched. On Rampage last week, Katsuyori Shibata and Daniel Garcia fought Shane Taylor Promotions. They continued the translation promo gimmick for Shibata backstage at Collision, with Garcia promising to get his back. That led to the match. The faces dominated in the finish, with Shibata pinning Lee Moriarty after a PK. Remember a couple of weeks ago when I was like optimistic about STP, thinking this had legs, it could actually be something? Bump that. It's not that the wrong team won, but if they couldn't even win this match, then what match are they going to win? On Rampage, Big Bill squashed a jobber in 90 seconds, yelling the entire time for Chris Jericho to watch him and teach him. He probably said it 10 times, like once every 10 seconds. And then he did it again after the bell. Jericho golf clapped watching him backstage. Shouldn't he be wanting Chris to watch him be people that matter? How is this impressive for a guy who was just the tag team champion? It was dumb as shit. On Dynamite, the FTW title was on the line, Jericho defending against Shibata. Jericho's dad was in the crowd. Jericho hit a nasty lion salt on Shibata's lower body. He dumped out a bag of hockey pucks and took a bump into them. I feel like swinging them around would have made for a better weapon. They did 5 minutes of chops, literally. Jericho threw a puck at Shibata as he ran at him, then put in walls of Jericho. Shibata escaped into a figure 4, so Jericho threw another puck at his head. Jericho put a trash can over Shibata and banged the top with a kendo stick, which Shibata no-sold by standing up and walking towards him menacingly. I say no-sold, but the kendo stick didn't do any damage to the trash can, so it was almost just wasted energy from Jericho. Shibata anyway backed him into a corner, headbutted him with the trash can, then drop-kicked it into him. He grabbed 2 kendo sticks and gave Jericho 1. They then sat cross-legged and traded shoulder shots. Shibata's first one actually hit Jericho in the ear, though. Tony Schiavone twice told us it was a great matchup. Jericho caught Shibata running with a codebreaker. Shibata countered Judas Effect into a sleeper hold and a ripcord chop. He set up a table when Big Bill ran in, booted his head off, and chokeslammed him through that table, with Jericho covering for the title retention. Just like I said with Cope and Buddy, this went like 4 or 5 minutes too long. If some of those slow sequences had been removed and this was a lot tighter as a match, only the fun parts would have remained, and it would have made it a lot better. Instead, like that other match, this was ponderous for long stretches. It really hurt the overall enjoyment, even if, again, there were multiple entertaining parts. Fun comedy sequences. I believe this proved me right, given my recent positivity about the learning tree gimmick. I saw a lot of you come at me disagreeing. You were tired of Jericho being featured so much. You were mad he won the FTW title. I feel vindicated by what we've gotten recently as part of this. Plus, Shibata being game for like American theatrics, it's always kind of cool to see, even if it bothers some of the purists out there. Again, if the time of the match was cut significantly, this would have come across much better. On Rampage this week, Big Bill reiterated he wants to be under Jericho's learning tree because he believes all he needs is a little guidance to take his career to the next level. So Jericho accepted him into the Jericho Vortex under the learning tree. Fun little segment continuing what we just talked about. Jericho trying to ham fist Jericho Vortex and learning tree into the entire deal. Like, it actually does make a little bit of sense, but it's such an eye roll when he does that. On Dynamite, Samoa Joe beat Isaiah Cassidy in a random match. The highlight was Joe doing his walkaway gimmick, but during a tope this time. Cassidy hit ringside hard. It was a crazy bump. Joe quickly hit Muscle Buster for the win. Credit to Zay, he was actually pretty funny in multiple parts of this match, but this was everything the Big Bill match was not. Though, of course, to be fair, Joe is coming off being champion, but like I said, Big Bill was coming off being tag team champion. On Rampage this week, the TBS title was on the line, Willow Nightingale against Sky Blue. This challenge was made by Sky on Dynamite 1 hour earlier. Sky called Willow Nightingale a fraud and pointed out that she already beat her in a tag team street fight. Reasonable challenge here, though given they do have a prior relationship, I was actually disappointed they didn't give it at least 1 full week of build. It was a total rush job. Stat later apologized to Willow for causing the slap from Mercedes Moné last week. Then she promised to massacre Sky. Stokely Hathaway went on a rant about the Bucks. That led to him and Stat being banned from ringside for the match. He was funny here as usual. During ring announcements, it was noted that this would be a Manitoba Massacre match. Anything goes, falls count anywhere. Unless I missed something, this was not promoted at all as a stipulation match once. And while their contentious relationship justified the stipulation to a degree, it completely came out of nowhere. Willow did a cannonball into an empty chair and later pounced Sky, who responded by throwing a chair legs first back at Nightingale. Sky got busted open hard way, then dumped out a bunch of thumbtacks. Willow did an avalanche fisherman's buster off the ropes, but both of them took a ton of tacks. This was actually the best singular move across, I think, the 6 hours of AEW that I watched. She missed a moonsault landing on chairs. Sky then pulled out a barbed wire board and put it on top of a table. And then Willow won with a Dr. Bomb off the apron into the board, with both of them landing on it. I'll remind you here that she issued a regular challenge only like 2 hours earlier. It was not announced as a hardcore match until seconds before the bell. Yet somehow there was an entire barbed wire board underneath the ring. AEW continues to do hardcore women's matches right for the most part. Willow and Sky were both excellent here, even if it did not make a shred of sense. Imagine if this was actually built up over an additional week like I wanted, and imagine if it was the main event of Dynamite next week instead of ending at 11:07 p.m. Eastern on a Wednesday. I hope the rating justifies these two kicking the shit out of each other in that spot. Still, it was worth staying up to watch. 3.75 stars, B+. On Rampage last week, the Kingdom wished Tony Khan well, hoping he'd be next Strong, before Roderick Strong cut a promo on Will Ospreay, saying he would break his back and humble him. This was Strong reverting to like the uninteresting promos he's cut for the vast majority of his career. And then on Rampage this week, I shit you not, they did the exact same promo. Like, it was literally almost identical. Total waste of time.
Come on, Oos. It's a joke, right? It's a joke, Oos. You ribbing me?
On Collision, the trio's titles were on the line for some reason. Bang Bang Gang against Top Flight and Action Andretti. Jay White retained the titles for his crew with Blade Runner. They're being announced as the Unified Trios champions, and they continue to carry both sets of titles, which makes me believe they may not actually be getting merged, like as an undisputed title, but rather temporarily held together by one trio. I'm also confused as to why they're doing that, and that they're carrying the titles with the pink straps when the originals had black straps. The Acclaimed aren't champions anymore. Why don't you have the real titles? There was no reason for this match to have happened, let alone for it to be a title match. On Rampage this week, White beat Dante Martin with Blade Runner. even though they already won and retained the trios titles in that match Saturday. The finishing sequence was a lot of fun. White lifted Martin up after the bell and made it look like he was raising his arm, only to hit a brainbuster instead. He did well, Dante did, selling an injury on the prior move, which made this appear more devastating. But I don't want this to continue, and it seems like it's going to. On Collision, Rey Fenix fought the Beast Mortos. This was Fenix's first match in nearly 6 months, coming back from injury. Great that he was able to make it back, and as usual, he was exceptional here. There was a fun spot where he stood on Mortos' shoulders, and then he got murked with a spear counter to a springboard. Fenix did a tornillo outside, but got caught with a really cool lung blower inside. Mortos kicked out of a bunch of kicks and a frog splash, so Fenix caught him with a roll-through pinning combination for the win. Excellent match. I would have preferred it ended with a more substantial, finishing type of sequence, like a finishing move, something major, so that Fenix could get a big win. It was another situation, and probably because Mortos, I think he's a CMLL guy, if memory serves. They probably didn't want him taking a full pinfall or, getting beat clean or whatever the case. But again, it's another situation where we have an AEW match that doesn't end in a substantial fashion, regardless. 4 stars, A-. On Collision, Roosh beat a jobber named Martin Stone in 2 minutes with bull's horns. Then he did it a second time after the bell, just to confirm to us, I guess, that he's a heel. This was his first AEW match in 4 months. Crazy to see how he and Fenix both had completely different style return matches. Tells you how Tony sees both of these guys. And granted, I agree, Fenix is the better talent, but what a drastic difference between the presentation and the importance of these matches. On Collision, the Acclaimed fought the Grizzled Young Vets. Visually, this was strange because they've been using Grizzled Young Vets as their name, I presume due to a WWE trademark, but the bottom third graphic and the ring announcer called them veterans, even though the graphic on screen, on the baseboard for Daly's Place, said Grizzled Young Vets. There was basically zero reaction for them, even though they're arguably the best free agent tag team in the world. Zach Gibson did not get to cut a promo, or he didn't get any mic time. That's absurd. The rap was fine for Max Caster, but Acclaimed has lost all of their heat. Gibson hit a gutbuster in the corner, with James Drake adding coast to coast. Seconds later, Billy Gunn distracted, and Acclaimed hit their finishing sequence for the win. Super disappointing across the board. But given GOIV hasn't signed with AEW, I'm not surprised Acclaimed won. To wrap up here, AEW basically gave us 2 different 3-hour blocks this week. And I would not be at all surprised if these were purposeful tests by Warner to ascertain what it means for ratings if Dynamite was set up as a 3-hour show with Rampage moving into that 3rd hour permanently. And here's what I'll say. As a DVR viewer for the Collision 3-hour block, it was totally fine. As a live viewer for the Dynamite block, it was an absolute slog to get through in the middle of the week. It was so difficult. And 2 hours of Dynamite, because of some of the inconsistent booking and storytelling and stuff like that, it doesn't fly by like SmackDown does, or like Raw, even Raw now under Triple H as a 3-hour show. I don't want to say it flies by, but it doesn't seem like 3 hours. This seemed like 3 hours. And if they make this decision and they move Dynamite to 3 hours, I would almost certainly start watching every single week at like 9 or 9:30 Eastern, so I could fast forward through all the commercials and any random matches that don't have purpose, because I am not on a Wednesday night going to sit through 3 hours of this on any consistent basis. So I did just want to point that out. Now, I did mention that we would briefly discuss ratings before we got out of this show. NXT on Tuesday did 564,000 viewers with a 0.14 demo, 18-49. This was the lowest viewership and demo that show has had since July 4th, 2023. And I will tell you, there is a very clear and understandable reason why. It's because it went head-to-head with the New York Knicks and Philadelphia 76ers game that went into overtime and is the most watched NBA playoff series going on right now. So it absolutely killed this. It was an identical rating to what NXT got in this exact same spot a year ago. So with NBA playoff and NHL playoff competition, it wasn't surprising necessarily. At the same time, NXT had been doing really well at the start of 2024. It was in the 700,000s in the demos of 0.20 or better. And WWE last year has proven to us that if they actually put some decent main roster talent on the show, and look, no offense to like Chelsea Green, who was a surprise, obviously, or like Natalya or the Good Brothers. But look, Natalya and the Good Brothers right now and Ivar, they're really like bottom level WWE main roster talent. They're not people who are going to get you to tune in to a show. WWE has proven when they do use some of those people, they can get to 800,000 consistently in the 700s. And I don't understand why they went away from doing that on the road to WrestleMania and then coming out of WrestleMania to keep the show hot. They did it for such a long stretch in 2023 where NXT was thriving. And they just stopped. And there's plenty of talent not being used consistently that is of the quality to get people to tune into this show. So 564 for a special edition, regardless of competition. I found that to be disappointing, but it was also simultaneously understandable. Now, we are taping this show before the AEW Dynamite rating comes out for this week. We discussed after the Tony Khan attack last week how interesting it was going to be to see what the rating would end up being for Dynamite this week, whether attention and interest carried over. But what we can talk about is the Collision rating from Saturday, because TNT purposely did not air Inside the NBA after that playoff game because they wanted the audience to translate from the game itself to Collision. And AEW purposefully booked Collision with Swerve opening the show because they wanted to retain as much audience as they possibly could. So Collision on Saturday pulled in 621,000 viewers in a 0.21 demo, which is by far their highest rating. And I'm actually kind of scrolling back on this list to try to see if I can find it since July 29th, 2023. Collision has just completely collapsed in the ratings for the most part. Now, it was still going up against some competition, but another way to put this rating in perspective is to discuss how it changed over not just the 2 hours of Collision, but the hour of Rampage that followed. And this is the context that's necessary here. So the first 5 minutes of Collision did 1.35 million viewers coming off of the basketball game. And into the first quarter hour, it dropped basically almost 500,000 viewers to 850. Now, this is expected because people were watching basketball and they're not there to watch wrestling. By the third quarter hour, it was down to 676,000. So a drop of another 175,000 viewers. So that is where I kind of pick it up and I say, okay, once you get to that second full quarter hour, now people who are here have either left their TV on for 30 minutes and not realized, or they're watching Collision. And Collision went from 676 by the end of that show to 440. So it lost another 236,000 viewers over that stretch. The final quarter hour of Collision, where your new AEW champion was in a title match against Claudio Castagnoli, a former WWE superstar, did 440,000 viewers with a 0.15 demo. That's not great. And then you get into Rampage, completely petered off from there. The final quarter hour of Collision was 276,000, which, I mean, Rampage already gets low ratings, but you want to do that time on a Saturday night, I'm sure that was what they expected. I can't imagine. So the point is, did AEW get a bump in the ratings for a single week from the NBA lead-in? Absolutely. That was the point. It ultimately succeeded because the number overall was higher. But just like with Dynamite last week when it came to the Tony Khan attack at the end of the show, we're not going to know if this actually translates into Collision doing better long-term until we see next week's ratings. And of course, that show hasn't even happened yet. Those ratings aren't even out. So next week, maybe we can look at what AEW did from a promotional standpoint in terms of building Dynamite with the Tony attack and trying to build Collision using Swerve here, doing it immediately after the NBA playoffs. And next week, we can discuss both ratings in this spot and see whether AEW actually thrived and benefited from those efforts, or if the ratings are pretty much the same as what they normally are. So folks, that wraps up this edition of the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. I appreciate, as always, everyone being with us for the journey. We will be back on Saturday with your WWE Backlash Instant Analysis podcast at some point in the afternoon. Once that show goes off the air, we'll be back next Tuesday with our normal WWE episode. And then next Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel, we'll be back talking NXT and AEW. On the way out, allow me to remind you that the Getting Over Wrestling podcast
It's all about Defy.
So head on over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating. On Apple, take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we will read it live right here on the show. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Getting Overcast for episode drops, news, analysis, highlights, all of that good stuff. And please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
and I hope you do as well, because for $5 a month or $50 for the entire year, you can become an official Getting Overhead. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/getting over. Sign up. You will get bonus audio, instant reactions to Raw, NXT, Dynamite, and SmackDown, along with exclusive news posts every single Friday. And yes, we have another one of those coming for you this Friday. buymeacoffee.com/getting over. Thank you all for listening to this edition of the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. This is the Silver King signing off and leaving you with just 3 final words. Bye for now.